In 1990 or so, Diane Ackerman wrote a national bestseller. It's called A Natural History of the Senses. It's a fascinating account of the way in which we experience the world around us the only way we can, through touch and taste and smell and sight and sound. Ackerman said, I write about nature and human nature, and most often about that twilight zone where the two meet and have something they can teach each other. My sermon today is an abridgment of her work. It's an abridgment of this book. It's an invitation to consider the sacredness of each and every moment in which life floods and courses through our senses. Here is Diane Ackerman. How sense-luscious is the world. Our senses define the edge of consciousness, and because we are born explorers after the unknown, we spend a lot of our lives pacing that windswept perimeter. We take drugs. We go to circuses. We tramp through jungles. We listen to loud music. We purchase exotic fragrances. We pay heavily for culinary novelties and are even willing to risk our lives to sample a new taste. In Japan, chefs offer the flesh of the pufferfish, or fugu, which is highly poisonous unless prepared with exquisite care. The most distinguished chefs leave just enough of the poison in the flesh to make the diner's lips tingle, so they know how close they are coming to their mortality. Haven't tried it myself. Ackerman says the senses don't just make sense of life, they tear reality apart into vibrant morsels and reassemble them into a meaningful pattern. They take samples. Life showers over everything, radiant, gushing. The senses feed shards of information to the brain like microscopic pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. It is both our panic and our privilege to be mortal and senseful. We live on the leash of our senses. Although they enlarge us, they also limit and restrain us. But oh, how beautifully. We need to return to feeling the textures of life. One of the great sensuists of all time, you know what a sensuist is? Not a sensualist, which is a person who delights in gratifying sexual appetites. A sensuist is someone who rejoices in sensory experience. One of the great sensuists was a handicapped woman with several senses gone. Blind, deaf, mute. Helen Keller's remaining senses were so finely attuned that when she put her hands on the radio to enjoy music, she could tell the difference between the cornets and the strings. She wrote at length about the whelm of life's aromas, tastes, touches, feelings. Despite her handicaps, because of them, she was more robustly alive than many people of her generation. Smell. Nothing is more memorable than a smell, Diane wrote. Smells detonate in our memory like poignant landmines. hit a tripwire of smell, and memories explode all at once. This is an aside from me. I remember purchasing a shampoo one time. The instant that I washed my hair, recollections of a girl I dated years before came flooding back. I never knew she had smelled so delicious because of Flex balsam. And yes, and that got me started on about a 10-year Flex balsam. Our sense of smell, she says, can be extraordinarily precise. Yet it is almost impossible to describe how something smells to someone who hasn't smelled it. Smell is the mute sense, the one without words. We see only when there is light enough. Taste only when we put things into our mouths. Touch only when we make contact. Hear only sounds that are loud enough. But we smell always and with every breath. There is a furnace in our cells, and when we breathe, we pass the world through our bodies, brew it lightly, and turn it loose again, gently altered for having known us. Aromas coat us, swirl around us, enter our bodies, emanate from us. We live in a constant wash of them. Still, when we try to describe a smell, words fail us. Try it now. Describe the smell of something familiar. A shoe store, a bakery, a church. What do we smell like? A butcher shop, a library. There should be a word, Diane writes, for the way the top of an infant's head smells. Talcum and fresh, unpolluted by life and diet. If there are words for all the pastels in a hue, the lavenders, mauves, fuchsias, plums, and lilacs, who will name the tones and tints of a smell? Now, again, I did discover this. Just this week, in fact. There is a word that describes that particular smell that belongs to old books. You ever take a whiff of the books? Bibliture. I love that scent of books. Not everyone does, I'm told, but I stick my head right in there. Bibliture or biblicor is created by the breakdown of chemical compounds, and there is an actual sweet and woodsy scent that belongs to old books. Each book has its own scent. Sometimes almond, sometimes vanilla, sometimes coffee or chocolate, sometimes a smoky, sweet mixture of the above, sometimes indescribable. Ella Patrice explained it on her blog, which is called lawhimsy.com. In fact, I think she might have made the word up herself. She called it, quote, a newly created word that combines the Greek words biblio, book, with ichor, or ichor, I-C-H-O-R, the fluid that flows like blood in the veins of the gods. How's that for a Greek word? She said the smells of faded, dusty pages, dried, aged glue and ink, the creaking of old spines, and the soft swoosh sound of silky or brittle pages being turned, or a beautiful symphony of the senses. Touch. Language is steeped in metaphors of touch. We call our emotions feelings. And we care most deeply when something touches us. Problems can be thorny, sticky, ticklish, or need to be handled with kid gloves. Touchy people get on our nerves. For the while there, it was touch and go, we say of a crisis. As Frederick Sachs wrote in the magazine The Sciences, the first scent to ignite, touch is often the last to burn out. In describing those final departures, we often talk of losing touch. At Purdue University Library, a woman librarian goes about her business, checking out people's books. She is part of an experiment in subliminal touch. And she knows that half the time she is to do nothing special. The other half, she is to touch people as insignificantly as possible. She brushes a student's hand lightly as she returns a library card. Then the student is followed outside or met outside and asked to fill out a questionnaire. The student is asked if the librarian smiled and if she touched him. In fact, the librarian had not smiled, but the student reports that she did, although he says she did not touch him. Soon a pattern becomes clear. Those students who have been subconsciously touched report much more satisfaction with the library and with life in general. In a related experiment staged at 2 restaurants, waitresses lightly and unobtrusively touch diners on the hand or the shoulder. Those customers who are touched don't rate the food or restaurant better, but they consistently tip the waitress better. Despite the fact that we are territorial creatures, Diane writes, contact warms us even without our knowing it. I remember going in for my heart surgery, lying on the table being prepped, and already drowsy from the sedative. I recall that one of the nurses stood behind my head and placed her hands on my shoulders, gently caressing me while offering words of praise and comfort. "You're doing great," she said, and things to that effect. But the touch is what I noticed. And I told her later how much it calmed and reassured my own emotional state at that time. It was amazing. Taste. Taste is an intimate sense, says Ackerman. We cannot taste things at a distance. Food is a big source of pleasure in most lives, both physiological and emotional, much of which involves memories of our childhood. No 2 of us taste the same plum. Heredity allows some people to eat asparagus and then pee fragrantly, or eat artichokes and then taste any drink, even water, as sweet. Some people are more sensitive to bitter tastes than others. Salt cravers have saltier saliva. Everyone's saliva is distinctive, flavored by diet, whether or not they smoke, heredity, maybe even their mood. Hearing. Sounds thicken the sensory stew of our lives, and we depend on them to help us interpret and express the world around us. For a baby in the womb, the mother's heartbeat performs the ultimate cradle song of peace and plenty. The surf-like waves of her respiration lull and soothe. The womb is a snug, familiar landscape, and the mother's heartbeat a clarion of safety. Mother and child are united by an umbilical cord of sound. Music, the perfume of hearing, probably began as a religious act. As far back as we can see, people made music. John Cage once emerged from a soundproof room to announce that there was no such thing as silence. And those of you who share my affliction of tinnitus can certainly attest to that. Even if we don't hear the outside world, we hear the rustling, throbbing, whooshing of our bodies. Deaf people often remark on the variety of sounds they hear. Let me ask you this: loss of sight or loss of hearing? Which one would you choose? You think hearing? I hear sight. How many sight? Yeah, that's what I meant. That's what I meant. How many would keep their sight and lose their hearing? Okay. I see hands slowly going up to a pretty significant majority. Good, good. Yeah. What'd you say? Most people, given a choice, would rather lose their hearing than their sight, as we demonstrated. But people who are both deaf and blind lament the loss of their hearing more than anything else. Helen Keller wrote, "The problems of deafness are deeper and more complex. I have found deafness to be a much greater handicap." Some know. Vision. Our eyes are the greatest monopolists of our senses. 70% of the body's sense receptors cluster in the eyes. And it is mainly through seeing the world that we appraise and understand it. That possibly explains why we would not want to lose our sight, because those of us who have it rely most heavily upon it. Our language is steeped in visual imagery. Seeing is believing. The writing is on the wall. We see through people whose characters are transparent. I see where you're coming from. After the Bible's first imperative, which was, let there be light. Let there be light. The very first one, before the people were there. God, after the Bible's first imperative, let there be light, God viewed each day's toil and saw that it was good. Presumably, God also had to see it to believe it. Ideas dawn on us if we are bright enough, not dim-witted, especially if we are visionary. And when we flirt, we do what? We give someone the eye. Because the eye loves novelty and can get used to almost any scene, much of life can drift into the vague background of our attention. How easy it is to overlook the furry yellow comb inside the throat of an iris, or the red forked tongue of a garter snake, or the way intense sorrow makes people bend their bodies as if they were blowing in a high wind, literally. Both science and art have a habit of waking us up, turning on all the lights, grabbing us by the collar and saying, "Pay attention!" And I would add that certain religions try to do the same thing. The great affair, the love affair with life, is to live as variously as possible, to groom one's curiosity like a high-spirited thoroughbred and gallop over the sun-struck hills every day. It began in mystery and it will end in mystery. But what a savage and beautiful country lies in between. Diane Ackerman. And so, in the words of Lynn Unger, who our reading was from, you might want to honor Ralph Waldo Emerson by going outside and having a good look and smell and listen and touch to the trees or birds or flowers. Go ahead, draw the breath of life into your lungs and feel your ribs, and maybe your heart and soul expand. Try it. You just might find out what it's like to feel refulgent yourself. Amen.